Good afternoon, Barbadians. Let me first thank you for allowing us to come into your homes on this Sunday evening. With me this evening, I have my friend and colleague, Dale Marshall, the Attorney General. And I wanted to use this opportunity to have a conversation with you as to where we are. Let me first of all, however, thank you, and I mean it, thank you all for literally guiding us and buttressing us over the course of the last 4 months or so. Not only was your confidence placed in us in the mandate that you gave us, but literally by the week, your messages, your Facebook posts, your Instagram posts, your high fives on the road, this is what has given us the strength and indeed the fortitude to continue with the task of stabilizing and rebuilding this very nation which we love. I'd also like to thank the members of the labor movement and the private sector, the social partnership, the churches, the civil society. Indeed, the churches particularly continue through their priests to send prayers for us. And of course, I'd like to thank the international community who has, over the course of the last month, really given us some space to be able to do the things which we believe to be necessary to bring our great country back to where you and I know it needs to be. Over the course of the few months, we've tried to stay the course and to keep faith with you. Let me recount. When we told you that we felt that we needed to make sure that Barbadians could be fortified so that they could make this journey with us, many doubted us. But it is you, those members of the social partnership and ordinary Barbadians who had the confidence and continued to allow us to believe that this was possible. For those public servants who had not received a pay increase for almost a decade, we said that we felt you needed to have the 5%. And you helped us get there. The social partnership agreed with us. The international community agreed with us. Equally, for those pensioners for whom the cost of living had outstripped literally the increases in pension, the same thing. For those who were the victims of a bus service that had been reduced on some days to less than 60 buses, we've been able, with the workers at the Transport Board, to be able to bring back the buses on most days to about 100, 105, while starting the process of procurement, recognizing that a Transport Board that has not bought buses since 2006 cannot service the needs of a country. Similarly, with the Sanitation Services Authority. Equally, we felt, and we are about to launch it now, that ordinary Barbadians should have access to capital in circumstances where they couldn't go to the banks or credit unions to borrow, and hence the Trust Loans program of $10 million we are about to launch within a matter of 2 weeks, so that ordinary Barbadians can borrow up to $5,000 to be able to get businesses off the ground in their various communities and to work in clusters to support each other. These are but some of the things that we have done. But what did we find against that? We had a country where, for example, the foreign reserves were down to just over $400 million, and where the debt was among the highest in the world, indeed the third highest in the world. And on the first morning after the cabinet was sworn in, we took a decision that we needed to be able to meet with the social partnership, first to determine not only how we got there, but how we would get out of this very difficult situation. And that's why I start this conversation by thanking all, because there is no doubt in my mind that unless we had the agreement of all Barbadians, the majority of Barbadians, we would not get out of this difficult circumstance. The reality is that within 1 week of both the Attorney General and myself being sworn in, we met next door and announced to the world that we would be approaching the International Monetary Fund and that we would be seeking to restructure our debt. And we did so after that week alone, intensive discussions with the social partnership and an agreement that above all else, we wanted to preserve our quality of life and to save the value of our dollar. I am happy to report that since that point in time, we have been able to conclude in short order an agreement with the International Monetary Fund to lend us funds to be able to buttress our tenuous foreign reserves. And we were able to do so on the basis of a program which we call the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, one that was settled not by persons outside of Barbados, but by the labor unions, the private sector, and the government of Barbados, by ordinary Barbadians with whom we rub shoulders and with whom we continue the level of consultation, not just at the political level, but indeed at the level of our advisors and our technocrats. And I want to use this opportunity to thank all who have gone the length and breadth of this country to be able to share these perspectives. In addition, we engage in an exercise of economic democracy, which I believe may well be unparalleled in the Commonwealth, where we said, look, we have a situation where we know that the cost of government is unsustainable. And therefore, we want to go through a very simple exercise. What is essential? What is highly desirable? What is optional? What is optional but may be delivered better elsewhere? And at the end of July, more than 5,000 Barbadians, separate from the social partnership, engaged in this exercise, answered more than 90 questions, on average took more than 45 minutes to answer these questions, and gave us a sense that there was in fact general consensus as to where Barbadians felt we needed to move and where the adjustment needs to be. We've come here this evening not just to talk about what we've done in the last 4 months, but I want to share with you because, you know, it is important. Sir Lloyd, former Prime Minister, asked us, how did we get here? And many Barbadians reflected on that. And I think we have and will continue to do so. But what I want to talk to you about is where we're going and how we will get there. What is the type of Barbados that we want to be able to build? And what is necessary for us to get there? You have heard me say over and over that if we want to save our dollar and if we want to remain committed to the peg to a fixed exchange rate, that what is required is fiscal discipline. And why is that dollar important? Not because it's a symbol. It is important also because it allows Barbadians to plan. It gives us stability. When you go to the supermarket, you know that relatively speaking, the prices will more or less be the same without the intervention of an exchange rate adjustment, as happens in other Caribbean countries close to us where there's an inability to plan as a result. Barbadians are very, very clear. They want that stability, and we agree with them. And it is against that background that we want to provide for a better life for our people always. Your children deserve better, and we must be able to function in a world where there are a number of obstacles without wondering how we will get there. Regrettably, those obstacles are now constraining our ability to do things. One, of course, is climate change. And we've seen only recently what floods can do to us and others, and we have to plan for them and to fight against them so as to protect Barbadians wherever possible in their homes. Two, that we live in a global community now that is less likely to entertain competition from small states. And regrettably, the last government, without talking to us, made commitments that would see us remove the difference between our domestic business sector and our international business sector. And this is going to present for us certain challenges as we move forward. Against the background of those two things and tenuous foreign reserves and a country that has not seen growth for many years, indeed, I refer to the last decade as the lost decade. Against that background, we have determined that Barbados' future requires of us that we come to grips with the reality that we must be a global hub, that we must be that country from which there is a sale of services and to a lesser extent goods to the rest of the world, that Barbadians must be comfortable in being able to have others come here to perform international business and financial services transactions, as we've done before, but to add to that in terms of renewable energy and to be an educational and medical hub for the hemisphere, to be able to allow for the creative economy and the expression of that creativity, not just for persons who live here to accept the output, but for those who live anywhere in the world. For us equally to be a place where those interested in advancing technology and research can find that this is a place from which they can do work comfortably. And why? We simply do not have enough Barbadians on our tax base to be able to support our quality of life. we have to be able to expand the numbers. And even when we add the single market and single economy, or even if we were to go the way as some would want us to do, to expand our population by natural means, that takes 20 to 25 years. It is because of that that our government is committed to establishing a population commission so that we can have the serious discussions that will allow us to be able to determine what is the optimum size for our population over the course of the next 50 years. I would like to say that Dale and I would still be here 50 years from now, but we may not. But that does not remove from us the necessity to ensure that our children and grandchildren are better placed in the same way that those who gathered at the garrison on that night in 1966 were committed to establishing the foundations for the first 50 years of this country's growth. Where will Barbados be at 100? That is our responsibility today, because it's not going to happen by serendipity. To that extent, my friends, I've come therefore to start these conversations with you. We promised you when we were on the platform asking for your confidence that we would not dodge you, that we would come and have the difficult conversations with you. And in a sense, that's what this evening is about. There are other times, as I did on the last occasion when we spoke, when I'll take questions from members of the media. But this afternoon is about sharing some thoughts with you so that you can understand where we are, bringing you up to date on some key issues that have been taking place over the course of the last few weeks and what will take place over the course of the next few weeks and months. I've asked Dale to join me too, because I felt that there are two sets of updates that you need from him with respect to where we are with fighting corruption and what we found, and also with the very difficult issue of crime in our midst, because that is the one thing that will destabilize us, particularly with the use of automatic weapons in our midst. So where are we today? Our government, as I said, was fortunate to have the International Monetary Fund carry before its board on the 1st of October a program that approved its ability to lend us money, 220% of our quota, or in simple terms, $290 million US dollars. Within 48 hours of that, the government of Barbados received almost the first 100 million Barbados dollars, which literally provided a buffer for our reserves, and our gross international reserves are on or about 640 million, 645 million as we speak. That act, however, was not a singular act in and of itself. The agreement of the International Monetary Fund sends signals to the rest of the international community, particularly the international financial community. It says that Barbados is on the right path, that the prognosis for the country is one that we can accept. And that plan that we formulated ourselves domestically, we have been lucky that really and truly that they were able to accept, because we felt strongly that those things which are necessary for us to bring about fiscal discipline to save our dollar are things that we could do as a people together. And the social partnership, in what has perhaps been about almost 15 meetings over the last 4 months, has been able to walk with us. The first phase was the mini budget, which we brought in June, which we made it clear that many of the fees and taxes which were being introduced were necessary for the short term. We hope that we will, during the course of the next 12 months, particularly during 2019, rationalize our tax system, particularly against the background of what is required of us given the commitments of the last government with our domestic corporation taxes and our international business taxes. We also recognize that we would also be able, from January 1st, 2020, be able to apply VAT at a higher level from 7.5% to 15% with respect to accommodation within our tourism sector. But we couldn't introduce it straight off because many of our hotels were already locked in to transactions with their partners internationally. This has meant that there are some fees and taxes that may not make it for the long haul. There are others, like the VAT, like the online transaction taxes, particularly the value-added tax, which will start from the 1st of December. And quite frankly, there is no basis for us to determine what that will deliver, largely because we have no evidence from which to draw in the past. Equally, there are others like the betting and gaming sector that were in a bit of limbo, difficulty, I don't know how you want to call it, that for the last 7 or 8 years have not paid because of representations they felt were made to them and a failing on the part of the last government to resolve these issues. We are in the midst of bringing resolution to these matters. So without prejudice to that, for the most part, our work with respect to preserving government's revenue is on track. But we also felt that it was necessary to share the burden. And sharing the burden generally meant, one, that we needed to share it with capital and labor. Two, that in sharing it with capital and labor, that we needed to recognize that our debt was unsustainable. Two, that our revenue base was too small. And three, that our expenditure patterns were too large. And we have therefore systematically gone about addressing each of the three of those. With respect to our revenue base, that I just discussed with you, and I pray that over the course of the next few months, with the help of also a fiscal affairs expert from the Government of Canada and the assistance of the International Monetary Fund, we will be able to stabilize Barbados's revenue over the course of the long haul. Many forget that the last major introduction of a tax was in 1997 with the value-added tax, and that is now some 21 years ago. And that any government such as ours that has had as much movement with measures to alter and adjust so many different taxes, particularly in the last decade, that we need to do a comprehensive review such that our tax system is fair, is certain, is transparent, and that the average Barbadian can go about their business and plan their business without the kind of interference that we've seen with respect to the tax system in recent times. With respect to our debt, domestic and external, we launched a debt exchange for the domestic debt in the middle of September, and that debt exchange has now closed. I am happy to report that with respect to that debt exchange, which involved 115% of our national income, or the equivalent of $11.9 billion of domestic debt and arrears, that we've had the extraordinary performance of 99% of those who tendered voting yes for the domestic debt exchange. And I'm told that that 99% of those who tendered represents more than 90% of those eligible to vote. This is an extraordinary position, particularly since we know that everyone who voted yes for this domestic debt exchange effectively voted to cut some of the income that they would otherwise have been entitled to. I feel particularly honored and humbled to lead a country at this time in the global affairs of our global affairs that would see both individuals and institutions recognize that we have a common path forward, and that what was required was for us to identify that common path and to allow this country to be able to be moved back onto a path of stability. Indeed, I feel particularly so with respect to the pensioners of this country, for whom we understand that this has been a difficult moment. We took the decision to exclude savings bonds because that was unique to those persons who participated in it, and we felt that they were lulled into participating in it at a time when they already knew that the status of Barbados's credit was being assessed by the international credit agencies as junk. We could not, however, easily separate out the pensioners who participated, or vulnerable persons who participated in the common instruments of treasury bills, debentures, and notes, because they were held not just by pensioners, but they were also held by institutions, particularly financial institutions, insurance companies, etc. Our lawyers advised, as I indicated to the country last week, that we will be in a position to meet the specific needs of our pensioners once this domestic debt exchange has closed. I am happy to say that having received the support and the positive vote of all of our banks, our insurance companies, and 99% of our pensioners who voted, that we are now in a position to address their peculiar needs within the next few weeks. And I will provide the specifics on those as soon as we can, because we understand the nervousness that many still have. Having said that, they have all voted to give their country, our country, a chance, and to be able to ensure that their children and their grandchildren can see their way forward by giving Barbados that platform to start fresh. I thank you on behalf of this country for that vote of confidence in our future. With respect to the external debt, our teams are continuing to engage, and I believe that there are meetings as soon as this week on these matters. And once this is behind us, then we will be in a position to advise the country what will be the savings both in interest and in terms of principal that will allow us to move forward with certainty. With respect to our expenditure, we believe that any approach that simply says we need to get rid of X thousand people, as we have been urged to do, 5,000 people, 4,000 people, is one that is wrong and does not leave the government fiscally fit to achieve anything. We knew that we were in trouble. We knew that a transport board that could not put buses on the road or that had chinks in the bus terminal was not somewhere that any Barbadian could have confidence in going forward. We knew that a sanitation services authority that would start the day as we inherited with 15 buses and end the day with 7 or 8 buses could not meet the needs of a country that needed 35 buses to service the sanitation needs of the country. We knew that a CBC that has more than 2.5 to 3 times the level of staff that it needs to run in today's world with technology would not be able to sustain itself, and its current level of debt would just continue to balloon. Or at the Barbados Water Authority, the commitment on the part of the last government to just explode its expenditure by not just its hiring practices, but indeed its commitment to contract after contract after contract without any capacity to determine whether they could pay. Or indeed, my friends, literally at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, commitments to extending contracts of persons without reference to whether persons were performing, but just simply to bind the hands of an incoming government. I just want at this minute to pause, because I think it is important to ask the Attorney General to share with you some of the things which we have confronted and to which he is committed upon dealing with, including the last recent one of Washington University of Barbados, which has left us, and with me, with a bill to being able to ensure that we do not have a humanitarian crisis on our hands, because these children who have been left out to sea, and I call them children because in many instances they're 18, 19, and 20, young people who are thousands of miles away from their home, have at least to be treated as like the human beings that they are, and to ensure that they are given access to shelter and to food and to the basic necessities of life while we sort out what is to happen with them, whether to be transferred to existing schools nationally or whether to return home to their countries depending on their indicative preferences. Dale, please.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. As we approach the last election, I think the overriding perspective of all Barbadians, the entire public, was that Barbados had reached a stage where corruption was rife. And it was clear to us that the average Barbadian felt that that was entirely unacceptable for our country. It was difficult for us to make a clear assessment being in opposition at the time. However, having taken the reins of office, we have systematically gone through file after file after file and found a number of startling things. In many respects, and in fact in many projects, there was a total absence of any fiscal discipline. We began to see signs of this as we worked with the Public Accounts Committee to look at the accounts of the National Housing Corporation. But when once we were actually in possession of the files, we were able to find that in many instances, contracts were awarded without any tender. And some of these contracts ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars. There was absolutely no fiscal prudence whatsoever. There was another very glaring set of circumstances, and it related to the matter of exorbitant professional fees, and in fact legal fees, which could not be justified by any reasonable measure. And it was clear to us that this was all part and parcel of a whole attitude where government was there to benefit a chosen few, but not to benefit large numbers of Barbadians. In some instances, invoices for large amounts of legal fees were submitted on the eve of an election and were paid not 30 days later, not 60 days later, but paid the very following day. One glaring instance of an invoice submitted for $1 million, and the entire invoice was settled the following day on the eve of an election, the day before the election. So we've been systematically going through all of these instances, and while we understand that Barbadians want us to get ahead with the business of running the country, it is also clear to us that Barbadians want justice. And we are committed to this process because it not only draws a line in the sand for our own administration and sets a standard for how we intend to operate, but it also makes it clear to the rest of the world that Barbados is intent on returning to financial normalcy. We estimate that we, over the last decade, have lost many, many millions of dollars in investment because of corruption. And I want the public to understand, though, that it isn't enough just to be able to make the allegation. We also need to be able to substantiate it. We understand that Barbadians want to see a quick rush to justice, but every single investigation along these lines has to be painstaking and slow. We are not in the business of judging anyone. That is a matter for the courts, but we do feel that we have an obligation to every single citizen of Barbados to hold those individuals who have besmirched the name of our country to account. It's not just in the question of awarding of contracts, it was also in the area of, as the Prime Minister mentioned, extending contracts long before the deadline had passed. It was also in the area of over-invoicing. So we have confronted a lot of these things, and we think that in order for us to represent to the international community that we have stability in our economic arrangements, we also have to show that there is fiscal prudence in relation to how we do business. A modern Barbados cannot get out of our economic difficulties unless we demonstrate not only to ourselves but to the international community that we are intent on following the highest standards of probity when it comes to our financial affairs. The work continues. We know that the public wants us to get on with business. We intend to use a few innovative tools. The Prime Minister has already mentioned that we are going to be giving Barbadians an opportunity to come forward. As a result of a public call made in Parliament, some Barbadians have come and met with herself and myself, and they've said, these are our facts, and they've been very helpful. More of this has to happen. But we also want to see a situation where Barbadians are able to come and speak with the authorities without necessarily being fearful that they will suffer penalty. And very much like we've had Truth and Reconciliation Commissions in other parts of the world, we feel it's important for us to allow a catharsis, a cleansing. People can come forward, speak to the authorities, admit their part in the misdeeds, and hopefully try to purge themselves of that kind of content and allow us to go further. Prime Minister, the work continues. In some instances, it may take us months. In others, it may take us years. But we want to assure the people of Barbados that we are absolutely committed to purging ourselves from the stain of corruption as we go forward. There are a number of pieces of legislation which we'll be introducing, and some of these will involve such things as unexplained wealth. It will also involve giving the courts powers to be able to look at how people have acquired various assets and so on. It's not just enough for us to hold people in public life to a high standard through our integrity and public life legislation, all of Barbados has to be willing to subject themselves to the discipline and to the rigors of conducting our affairs in a way that we can be proud of.
Thank you, Dale. And this is the point that I want to make, because this is part of how we get there. We will need to be disciplined. We will need to make sacrifice. We will need to be creative. We will need to set clear goals and go after them. I've said to you just now that we need to have the difficult conversation about the size of our tax base and the size of our population. Dale's conversation is a difficult one to get Barbadians to recognize that, in the words of Tanya Stevens, that you do have corruption in high and low places, and not just in high places. And we need to deal with it, because corruption is a cancer that literally takes away money and resources that we could better spend to help those people who really, truly need it. Because we're not naturally wealthy, but we can get there, and we have done well in the past, and we can do well in the future. When I spoke to you about expenditure, I want to contextualize it. How does 6 governments between 1955 and 2007 recognize that we needed to be fiscally disciplined? Particularly those who, after the early 70s, knew that we were having a fixed exchange rate. And before that, those, when we were a colony, we were not allowed to be able to borrow more than we, in fact, could raise in terms of our revenue, because we weren't allowed to run deficits in those days. But even in those early days, we never had governments that spent more than they earned, and that, to the extent that we did on the one occasion here and there, 5 times, never in 2 consecutive years, and never more than 20 million. 6 governments from 1955 to 2007. And then all of a sudden, from 2008 to 2018, boom, everything broke out. And literally, we've gone year after year after year after year after year after year. And we know it's unsustainable. It is like somebody eating and gorging themselves day after day after day. It's unsustainable. So where are we now? We have met with the social partnership, and we've agreed on a few principles. One, that we have to get back growth. There's no sense cutting without growing. So you have to cut in a way that allows you to be able to grow. And we need to be able to grow to allow ourselves to be able to attract more investment, both locally and from outside, because, as I said, Barbados must see itself as a hub from which people can sell their services globally. 2, that in so doing, that we need to recognize that many of our systems and indeed workflows and our laws are late 19th century, 20th century, but in 18 months, we enter the 21st century, 3rd decade. Now, how do we enter the 3rd decade of the 21st century, but still hold on to laws that were suited to the earliest part of the 20th century? As I used to say, how do you operate in a digital economy, a digital age, with analog services? You must follow. So that the first thing that we need to do is to modernize our government. You complain that you can walk about with your phone, you can watch things from all over the world, you can apply for services, you can buy books and all kinds of things on the internet, but you can't pay your bills locally, easily, to government on your phone. Against that background, we have said and set ourselves a target that, first and foremost, we must modernize our government to become fiscally fit and to allow us to be able to grow in a way that makes sense for where we want to go. As a result, we recognize that we can't keep doing things the same way that we used to. We also recognize that there are some services that are being performed and are likely to be performed within the private sector, particularly as it relates to growth. We have about $100 million in capital projects for roads to execute now. Money from the CDB, Caribbean Development Bank, from the Latin American Development Bank, otherwise known as CAF, and from the Inter-American Development Bank. And we have companies that are going to be participating in that road building program over the next 3 years. Similarly, we have major investments within the construction sector that will start from January. The beaches development at Speightstown is going to be $900 million over the course of the next 2.5 years to build that hotel. That will start in January. The beach works have already started. Similarly, at Boarded Hall, Sagicor is going to construct a senior citizens village, both for independent living and for assisted living, and on the other side of the road, an oncology and cardiovascular clinic. There are at least 2 other proposals on my desk as Minister responsible for town planning that speak to other clinics that will set up to give us the capacity to be the medical hub to which I referred earlier. Equally, we have Ross University, as you are aware, which will open its doors from the first few days of January, and which will allow us to have Barbados as an educational hub. And I equally have before me another proposal for the establishment of a boarding school at the secondary level for 800 children from overseas, such that we are able to have an international boarding school here to be able to cater to those in the center of our island. These educational institutions and medical institutions are the equivalent of having long-term tourists. In the case of Ross, that is the equivalent of their 1,500 students and their 100 faculty, of having the equivalent of 60,000 more tourists in Barbados next year, on average for 7 days each. Similarly, the 800 students who we hope to be able to accommodate once we can settle the regulatory issues would be the equivalent of having another 30,000 tourists if we can get them started from September next year. These are the things that allow us to be the educational and medical hub that we need. At the same time, as we are growing, therefore, in the private sector, we recognize that now is the opportune time for us to make the difficult decisions that will allow our government to remain fit, fiscally fit, to be able to encourage the growth and to ensure that that kind of situation which led ultimately to fiscal profligacy, to way overspending, can be a thing of the past, so that we can go forward confident that we can grow this economy and become a country that punches above its weight accordingly. These are the discussions that we've had in the social partnership. And we've agreed to a few principles, that in modernizing our government and in being able to make the difficult decisions, that we will do so first and foremost respecting the principle of last in, first out, that we would equally do so respecting, with respect to state-owned enterprises and government departments, the wishes of the Barbadian people as expressed in the survey and the social partnership as to what was essential, what is highly desirable, what is optional but may be delivered better elsewhere. And in so doing, we've come to some clear agreements as to where we need to go. I want to thank the members of the social partnership for allowing us to drill down to this level of detail, because in being able to drill down to this level of detail, we have removed the uncertainty that would otherwise attach itself to these circumstances. I want to say up front that we're not talking about thousands of persons. But what hurts for me, and I had to say in the room, unions go through this all the time, members of the civil service go through this all the time. For me, layoffs is something completely new. So forgive me if I don't feel good or do it well, because I believe fundamentally that these are our brothers and sisters, these are our mothers and fathers, these are our Barbadian neighbors and friends. And therefore, what I've tried to do is to have the government use the approach of a scalpel and not that of an axe that wildly cuts. I can give the country the assurance that while we do not have an exact number, because we are following process rather than arithmetical deductions, we know that it is unlikely to be more than 1,500 people over the course of the next few weeks. But regrettably, one is too many. As a result, we have agreed, and I thank the unions for putting on the table the measurements that are necessary in order for us to be able to deal with these packages. One, that there will be severance type packages available to persons, particularly the temporary persons, and more than 80% of the persons who are affected are temporary. Two, that those severance type packages will also be buttressed by payment in lieu of notice. Three, that without prejudice to that in some instances that there is vacation pay due to officers on an individual level. And above all else, 4, I have insisted, and my cabinet has agreed with me, that the day on which persons receive notice, unlike what has happened before, they must walk home with a check, at least dealing with the severance type payments and indeed the notice and indeed the termination. Why? Because none of us would feel good having to go home without knowing where money is coming from and who is going to help us tomorrow, or to come back next week or next month and be begging for money. And at the very least, if we're going to do this, we have to do it properly. We recognize that within central government that we want to modernize our document management, but equally that there are opportunities that exist for those same persons to work with existing companies in Barbados and to sell back their services contractually to government from January. Because government, believe you me, has miles and miles of paper that needs to be digitized and cannot just be discarded, even as we move to document management systems and even as we seek to review the workflow ministry by ministry, department by department. Will it be seamless and absolutely perfect? Probably not. I've been around long enough to know that mistakes are made. But what is important is that if mistakes are made and if they're brought to our attention, that we correct them as soon as possible. We've also agreed that without prejudice to what they are entitled to receive, that those types of opportunities, as I just explained with respect to persons who may be stenotypists or clerk typists, that they now be given the opportunity to be at the forefront of the digitization of government's records. Similarly, that can start from as early in the new year as January. That similarly, that we also give them the opportunity while they're doing that, because that will be a defined project that will start and end in a couple of years, and we are in discussions with our partners within the international financial community to finance that project of the digitization of government's records, such as to ease the pressure that those persons who may be laid off in the next few weeks in that category of workers will face as we go forward. With respect to those who may go at the Ministry of Public Works, equally, we have recognized that those who are participating in government's $100 million road program are likely to need to be able to hire persons within the next few months to be able to participate in that $100 million of activity, which will last us for the next 3 years. We also recognize that some of those construction type workers will also be able to work, for example, in the major projects to which I referred earlier. There are some who may choose not to work at all and who may be happy just to go home, and that's fine. But what we want to do, and believe you me, it is important to me, we are setting up a household mitigation unit where I will have 5 persons who will interact with all of those who are being laid off to make sure that there is a minimum standard of living below which no one in this country will fall. And I give people my commitment, the commitment of our government on that, and I know that my ministers and the members of parliament are ad idem with me with respect to this. They will therefore be able to work with the private sector, with civil society, with the church in particular, and with government through other contractual obligations like the ones to which I've mentioned already, to make sure that we keep that minimum platform. We've also determined that an option form will go to persons, asking persons to indicate what is their passion, what is their wish. Would they like to be retrained in a particular area? Do they want access to a 1/4 acre of land, and do they want us to help them establish a greenhouse so that they can get into some type of farming? Or are they interested in livestock farming that we can help them with? We are also going to amend the laws to be able to allow for an affirmative action program up to 20% of the value of government's goods and services. Right now, we spend about $400 million a year procuring goods and services. 20% of that is $80 million a year. That is more than 4 times the cost of the separation package that we will face in the next few weeks for central government, and indeed is an amount that can be shared with both existing providers of services or if there are groups of people who have been laid off who can, for example, come together and want to be able to provide government with services or goods that we are now currently sending to others overseas or to entities so large that the adjustment in business will not hurt them, then we are prepared to listen. A committee will be set up, not of politicians, but of those in the social partnership, along with members of the public service, to determine who benefits in that affirmative action program. So believe you me when I say to you that your government is working assiduously to minimize the dislocation for those workers who will be affected. I want to make the point that it is not just central government, but of course the state-owned enterprises that you've spoken about, and therefore there are departments and government entities that will be affected in different ways. In the case of the Government Information Service and the Government Printery, we expect to establish a new public affairs unit, but that conversation with the workers will start assiduously this week. Similarly, at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, we need to be able to recognize that technology has made the establishment of a broadcast station in the 1960s anachronistic, in circumstances where you can almost do everything you want on a mobile phone now, and therefore how do we come into today's world with respect to CBC, as well as how do we better leverage the multi-choice platform and to allow the profits from that to be able to pay for both the public affairs unit and indeed all of our cultural activities. Simple premise, that if things are generated from overseas content, then we must be able to anchor our people in terms of national identity with the profits from that overseas content. Indeed, Adrian Green's article today in Today's Nation is worthy for everybody to read, because if we don't settle our national identity issues, we cannot settle our economic stability issues. Similarly, the registries, namely the Corporate Affairs Registry, the Land Registry, and we will separate, as Dale will tell you shortly, to the people in the country shortly, the vital statistics part of the Supreme Court Registry, and we hope to enter a public-private partnership so that those services can be more efficiently and effectively delivered, because if we are going to sell our services globally to the world, then we need to make sure that those services with respect to our registries are among the best in the world. And as we enter that public-private partnership, we want to give the workers in those registries the opportunity to be able to own the shares in those registries as we go forward, so that where government would otherwise be the major owner in a PPP, we are saying no, let the workers also share with us, with whomever we partner, to be able to establish that. We will enter a joint venture with Barbados Cricket Association instead of COMI, the Kensington Oval Management Inc., remaining back with government alone. Similarly, a request for proposals will go out for the Caves of Barbados so that that entity can be better managed and in fact developed by the private sector, recognizing that the land will always remain with government and we will only part with it by way of lease, but the operations for the use of the caves can be a private company. Similarly, the gymnasium will no longer be managed by an individual board, but it will now be subsumed under the National Sports Council again, and the Cultural Industries Development Authority will be absorbed back into the National Cultural Foundation. The Phase 3 entities will start, and those are the more complex ones, because the ones that I've just mentioned we reckon can finish between now and the end of the year, early next year. The Phase 3 entities, even though we are starting them now, we are prepared for them to run until early 2020 with respect to the changes that we must do there because of their complex nature. And to what am I referring? The Transport Board, the Barbados Water Authority, the Barbados Agricultural Management Corporation, the Barbados Agricultural Management and Development Corporation. These are the key ones, the National Housing Corporation, the Urban Development Commission, the Rural Development Commission. We have, regrettably, to confront the reality that if we want these services to play the role to be able to deliver better to the average Barbadian household, then we need to take control of the runaway expenditure and the profligate spending and the contractual liabilities to which they had been committed in the last government without reference to whether we could pay for them or not. They are not easy discussions, but they are ones that we are comfortable with, that we think in the social partnership that we can make, and that we will not do in a way that compromises on the quality of service, whether it is buses, whether it is water, whatever it is, at sanitation, the collection of garbage, at national housing, the support services to the people in the housing units. And ultimately, with urban and rural, we probably will have to look with its merging with the NHC to be able to create an entity that deals with infrastructure for poor people in this country, particularly those who do not have access to pit toilets, who have access to pit toilets only and do not have access to waterborne facilities. These things are not things to be hidden in a room. We have spent the last 4 months discussing it with your representatives, among your unions, the private sector, and we are now also going to ensure that we continue the discussions with you, the public, because we have come to the point of doing. I ask you to walk with us. It's not going to be easy. But I also ask you, if you have family who will be affected, help us help them. Help us reach out to them. This country, believe you me, this country has done it before. We will do it again. It is not easy to be able to treat to the concerns of families who will be affected. I'm happy that we have been able to contain the numbers, but I'm deeply saddened that it is any one person. And every time I think about it, I become more and more committed to hold those persons accountable for who brought our great country to this position. But I don't want you only to focus on how we got there. I want you to focus with me on how we will get where we need to go. When I go overseas and I meet with the IMF, or I've met, as I've been doing recently with the World Bank, Barbados has not been able to borrow from the World Bank for major projects for almost 3 decades other than the HIV/AIDS project. And we have made the point to them that we need the assistance. We know that we will not be able to as a middle-income country. But over the course of the life of our Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program and our extended fund facility with the IMF, we need to be able to borrow and to have access to development money in a way that we would not hitherto, because we know we cannot go to the international capital markets for a few years. The only good news is that we weren't able to go to the international capital markets for the last 5 years. But we knew when others were rubbishing the downgrades that there were consequences that we were facing. We saw it when Sagicor picked up and moved its head office to Bermuda, because a company cannot have a better credit rating than the sovereign nation. And we knew that we would have to deal with these issues fundamentally. Luckily, the management at the World Bank has agreed now that we can work towards trying to get technical assistance. And over the course of the next few months, we hope we will be able to settle with them a case that will allow us to be able to borrow from them to buttress what we are getting from the Inter-American Development Bank, from the Caribbean Development Bank, and from the Latin American Development Bank. Similarly, from those bilateral arrangements which we have. Some of you may see me expand the footprint of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the next financial year. It's not because we want to be able to play large and in charge overseas, but we're going to have to better leverage our relationships with other countries and with institutions if we are going to get this country through this period of time, as I know we can. But I need each and every one of you to continue to hold faith, to continue to give us the benefit of the doubt, to continue to believe that this country, which has gone through far worse in a world war, or even before when our ancestors were treated in a way that we don't even want to talk about now, that if we could get through all of these things, believe you me, we can do this. And when I say that we have your back, believe you me, we have your back. We will report to you shortly on the details of the domestic debt exchange in the next day or two, but as I said, I'm humbled by its success. We will report to you shortly on the program with respect to the pensioners. I'm telling you today that our government is committed to ensuring that the people who the government of Barbados has owed for years, those of you who are owed personal income tax refunds, corporation tax refunds, value-added tax refunds, those of you who have had arrears, that we will start first with those with the personal income tax refunds in the next few months, and that over the course of the 4 years, as God gives us breath and life, that we will work down every cent of those arrears in the next 4 years. I ask you finally to recognize that this is not a walk for any one government or any one institution alone. This is a walk for each and every one of us. For those of you who believe that it is your duty to help us, join us. For those who want to cause trouble, and Dale will speak to it in the future with respect to our crime situation, as I told you, not about here, because there is too much that we are facing already for us now to add to ourselves things that we do not need to add. I ask Barbadians, help me to help our people over the next few weeks. But I have every confidence that with the projects in line, with the opportunities that we know that are before us, with the framework for town planning that we will start to discuss as soon as Friday in the House of Assembly with the Green Paper, and with legislation we expect before the end of the year, that we can do this, but we need to do it together. I thank you for listening to us this evening, and I say to you that these conversations, not just from myself and Dale, but with my other ministers, will be how we will help chart our way. And when the time comes, and you ask, how will we get there? We will get there by being disciplined, by making sacrifices, but by being creative, by being capable of thinking outside of the box, by ensuring that as we move, we carry the most vulnerable among us. Because if we leave anyone behind, it is a statement of who we are as a people. This is not the Barbados that we want to be. The one that we want to be is to take as many of our people on this journey. And I promise you, and I don't make promises normally, I promise you that if we do this together, trust me, and we trust in the Lord, then we shall be successful in this mission. I thank you for listening to us, and I apologize if I have prayed too long upon your time on this Sunday evening. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless Barbados.